But now the main event, and the main event is Dr. Onnie Rogers. So Dr. Onnie Rogers is an assistant professor of psychology, where she directs the DICE Lab, Development of Identities in Cultural Environments. A developmental psychologist and identity scholar, Rogers is interested in social and educational inequities and the mechanisms through which macro-level disparities are both perpetuated and disrupted at the micro-level of identities and relationships. Her projects focus on how children and adolescents make sense of their racial, ethnic, and gender identities, how cultural stereotypes and expectations shape the development and intersectionality of these identities, and the ways in which multiple identities influence adolescents' social, emotional, and academic outcomes. Rogers earned her PhD in developmental psychology from New York University, and she holds a BA in psychology and educational studies from UCLA. But that's not all. And this is also, so I did a little research on you, Onnie, and part of this is like a little bit makes me go like, dang, I mean, I knew she was a rock star, but she got her PhD in 2012. So that's less than 10 years ago, people, right? She's received grants from the National Science Foundation, from the Spencer Foundation, and recently received a Northwestern Provost faculty grant. According to Northwestern scholars, she has almost 300 scholarly citations, 23 articles, 11 book chapters, conference contributions, and she's got 12 things under review right now, right? I can barely count to 12. She's got 12 publications out there. And these are not like in the Journal of Peter stuff. This is developmental psychology, research in human development. Like these are the leading journals in the field. She's presented at over 35 conferences, had over 28 invited lectures, and more than a dozen media commentaries and editorials. She is getting it out there because it's good, important stuff to get out there. She's an associate editor of the Journal of Adolescent Research and other awards. She got the Shiro Community Award, the Gender Equity and Action Faculty Award, the Association of Psychological Science Rising Star. Well, that's a clear rising star, dang. And just so you don't think she's just a brain on a stick, she is in the UCLA Athletics Hall of Fame, right? So national champion, Dr. Onnie Rogers. And of course, clearly the most important thing on her CV is that she serves on the Northwestern University Office of Undergraduate Research Advisory Council, right? Because we know she's the smarty pants person that needs to be helping us to shape what we've got. So please, let's welcome Onnie to talk about mentorship, nurturing relationships and identities through research.
Wow, wow, wow. Peter, that was incredibly generous. Thank you for that. I'm going to have to call upon you to write up my tenure materials. This was very insightful. So thank you. Thank you to Peter and the whole OUR team for just creating such a wonderful and intentional space for all of us to grow and learn together and to celebrate as we are today. So it is my distinct honor and delight to kick off this inaugural keynote for the Undergraduate Research Expo. From the time I was very young, I imagined myself as a teacher. So I imagined my adult self in a creatively decorated classroom with a group of tiny humans filling those miniature-sized desks and chairs. And as it often happens, this image shifted a bit while I was in college, in part because I accidentally majored in psychology instead of education, but that's another story. And then as a super senior, because I took 5 years to finish my undergraduate studies, I volunteered in a research lab, mostly because I had spare time. So these two accidents turned out to be rather divine turning points, which at the time I really believed were taking me away from teaching. But over the years, I've realized they led me straight into the heart of it. So for the sake of time, this will be brief. I'm not going to retell how these accidents came to be, but instead what I discovered through them, which was first that I discovered research, which was something I knew nothing about. And secondly, that I discovered mentoring through research. So I was a senior at UCLA when I decided / realized that being an elementary school teacher was not going to be my actual path. So I had been told by one of my education professors that I should consider graduate school and getting a PhD. And I didn't even know what that was, to be honest, but I had some extra time in my bonus senior year schedule. And so I responded to an ad to be a research assistant. And so I spent 2 quarters collecting data at an after-school program with elementary school kids in Los Angeles. And it was pretty fun. It was definitely interesting and challenging. And I figured I liked it well enough. And so maybe I should try out this graduate school thing. And that's what I did. So flash forward a couple of years as a graduate student at New York University. A couple years into the program, I was selected as the graduate teaching assistant for our undergraduate honors program. And this was a 2-year program, research intensive, where juniors and seniors had to apply and get into this honors program for their last 2 years. And they spent a year in research methods and design. They also did practicum hours and applied settings. So they were in schools and clinics and those sorts of things. And then in their senior year, they did their own research project, much like an honors thesis here, with a capstone event, much like what we're doing right now, where students presented their projects to the NYU community. So my job, my role, was teaching the methods courses, of course, and then mentoring students on their projects, preparing them for this big conference. And this was my first taste of the power of mentoring through research. My students at NYU were doing theses on all sorts of things, from deaf children's academic experiences to bilingualism, to gay youth identity development, to physical fitness and well-being, language and emotion, Polish immigrant families, socialization. I had expertise in none of these things. I mean, I was a grad student, and we can be honest, I still don't know much about these things. But I quickly learned that my job was not about expertise in each of these content areas, but in really nurturing a relationship where students felt seen, where their ideas and their experiences were validated and supported. And this relationship mattered because each of the students was pursuing a project that was not just relevant to psychology, as we often framed it, but it was relevant in some way to who they are and who they want to be, to their own identities, to their experiences in the world. So research is, or it can be, a very vulnerable space. Sure, it's vulnerable because we're learning new content and new skills, but we're also learning about ourselves. Research is often where we begin to see ourselves, or where we notice that we're not seen in the current state of knowledge. And it's where we share ideas and ask questions that are important to us, and often that are about us, about our identities, about our own relationships, our hopes, our fears, our desires. So over the years, research for me has really become a pathway through which I'm able to share what I know, of course, but more importantly, where I share who I am, what I care about, what I worry about, what I hope for, and I can share that with my students. In this space, I can invite students as well to share what they know, to share who they are, what they care about, what they worry about. And together we discover what we want to know and how we want to create change. Research is where we learn and grow together intellectually, socially, and emotionally. It's where we nurture our relationships with ourselves as well as each other. So yes, I now teach in the classroom, and even though there aren't teeny tiny chairs and colorful art projects on the walls, I do enjoy teaching in the classroom, the college classroom, virtual or otherwise. But teaching through research is unique. And it's where I get to teach in a form and in a context that I never even realized existed. And now what I've come to see is that mentoring is sort of a fancy academic word for relationships. It's not a set of rules or to-dos or don'ts. Certainly there are good strategies and structures to support good mentoring. But from my experience, it's really about genuine curiosity and authentic relationship. And that's the best part of the job. Building relationships with students through research, through discovery, through challenges, through victories, and watching how the research transforms who they are and who they hope to become. One of our recent alums from the DICE lab wrote this to me. Thank you for your mentorship on said project. That study raised so many questions for me and opened me to working diligently for the rest of my days on becoming anti-racist as a person, as a mother, as a researcher. Many people, I think, go into research because they do want to change the world. And more than the research itself, I've come to realize it's the relationships and the identities that we build through our research that have lasting impact and ultimately pave a path, one of the many paths, towards changing the world. So thank you all. Thank you to all my students who've been part of DICE, part of the DICE family, and shared this research journey. Thank you all for taking this slice of your afternoon with me. And I hope everyone's take some time to really enjoy the fantastic presentations from our Northwestern undergraduate students and their mentors. Thank you.
Thank you. That was beautiful. Yay. One of the crappy things about webinar is that like we don't get all of the people. There's like 60 people and they're all going yay, but we can't actually hear them. So we'll do it just for you. Applause from all. So that's really beautiful. And so one thing we'd like to do is we'd like to open it up to questions for people using the Q&A function or the chat. Either way, just so we can kind of engage. And so one question I had for you is like, one of the things that we find at a place like Northwestern, where everyone is just so bright, but they've also been kind of enculturated to what they're really good at when they start college is finding answers that already have answers, right? Because that's how you get into college, right? You do really good on standardized tests and you do all these other, right? And what we're trying to do with research is we don't know the answers. No one knows the answers. That's why we're after it and getting them to think in terms of questions. So how do you as a mentor work with them? Because that can be pretty scary for people who are really good at one thing to shift it. How do you engage with that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's mostly intentional, right? So I spend time when students start in the lab and building our lab culture over the last few years of being clear that this is not a space for demonstrating. So this isn't about how smart you are or how much you know, right? We're all here to learn, to discover. And so sort of removing that thread of performance that I think is part of what you're getting at. It's so deeply entrenched in everything we do that we have to show up and know things and show how much we know, as opposed to being deeply curious. So we talk a lot about just being curious, asking questions that are genuine. Like ask a question that you really care about, not the question that you think makes you look smart or, that you think someone else doesn't know. So I think that sort of naming it explicitly. And then the other thing is my students are collaborators, right? So when I interview students or bring them onto the team, we're always very clear that you're not here just to do a set of tasks, but you're here to be thought partners, right? So you're given a task to do. And one of the things we do is listen to a lot of interviews. Most of my work is based on interviews with young people. So we're listening to interviews and all of the students get trained in critical memos. So listening carefully, reflecting, asking questions. What do you notice? What comes up? And then what did you notice? What did you notice? And so from the beginning, they're thought partners as opposed to just doers, if you will. And I think that also opens up space for students to engage differently.
That's great. That's wonderful. Okay, so we do have some questions. So from the Q&A, Thomas Sherrick asks, I'm a junior doing research on music therapy for treating adolescent depression. Do you feel like music in a research environment can greatly impact identity formation together?
Oh, that's a great question.
A mentor?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And as someone who studies identity, I think everything is connected to identity in some way, in some fashion. So absolutely, I can imagine that being incredibly useful. And there is some work, there's a grad student actually, I think, who's in media studies, who's been looking at hip hop and music and lyrics among Black youth and Black boys around identity. So certainly music is culture and culture is connected to identity. So I think there's lots of important things to connect. And I think psychology has traditionally struggled with being more interdisciplinary, and we're moving in those directions, right? But to think about how the arts and other aspects of the lived experience really intersect with some of these core psychological processes that we often study in psychology.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I've seen a number over the years of psychology theater double majors who have created projects that are weaving those kinds of things together.
Yeah.
That's great. So we also have in the chat, Joseph Michaud. So who picks, he asks, who picks the topics? Do the students do research that is defined by the mentor, or are students matched to mentors based on how they want to research? How do students find a mentor? So what you can talk about is how that works for you, and then
okay,
tell them where to go for our larger thing.
Yeah. So the office will have plenty of answers for that. In our lab, students typically do inquire to work in the lab. They're interested in the topics, the questions that we're already exploring. And so that's how they find us. And then in terms of the projects they do, it sort of depends. Almost all of the work, well, not even almost, all of the work we do is collaborative in some way. So students are always working with each other in twos or threes. And so students come in and they have some foundational learning to do. So you're working on a project, and then they sort of progress to asking their own questions within those existing data. So we have students who are who have started to collect their own data, as well as students who are working with existing data and asking different questions that have come up for them. And so we have 2 seniors who did their theses this year, who both are using existing data in our lab, but have analyzed those data and asked questions that were not part of the original study. So it's sort of a combination.
Yeah, and to answer it more broadly, the Office of Undergraduate Research sponsors runs a how to find a faculty mentor or how to find a lab, depending, every week of every quarter. And we also offer individual advising. So just email us and we'll set up a meeting and we'll talk through how to do this process for you, because it really varies across fields. So another question, do you think it is more important to find a mentor who you really connect with, or is it more important to work with a mentor who conducts research in your field of interest, specifically graduate?
Such a good question.
Mm.
So of course the optimal is both. But I will say in some ways it depends on you as a person, as a scholar. So for some, that sense of connection with a mentor on a person level is more important than the topic itself. For others, you might have that mentorship or connection elsewhere, and you really need that content knowledge. And so while this person may not be your dream mentor in all the other ways, they really might provide the content knowledge that you need. So from my view, if I had to say broadly, I would say getting into research for the first time, finding a mentor you connect with is most important, right? Understanding what research is all about, getting your ideas generated and getting excited about what research can be like and what it can feel like is more important than specific topics. I've had students, the student who was a med major, and she was had done some research in a medical lab and just really didn't like it. She was just so miserable, and she still wanted to do research, and she was going down. So she came and did research in our lab on the side. And then she's like, oh my gosh, I love research. This is so much fun. This is so exciting. And no, she's not now becoming, an identity scholar studying child development, but she gets the idea of research, how to ask good questions, how to do the analysis, what's exciting about it. And then she can take that to the content area that really is important to her.
That's great. That's great. We have another question from Karina Aguilar. Do you or your mentees ever feel that research on problems you care about feels too disconnected from the actual experiences of this problem? How do you balance focusing on the academic versus applied practical implications of your work? And what advice might you give to students on that?
So good. We have this conversation a lot in our lab. It's a really important one, and one I actually encourage students to have with themselves and with other people. So definitely there's the sense that research is too slow. It takes too long, and it does often feel disconnected. But there are ways for it to feel deeply meaningful and connected. And one of the ways that we do that in our lab is just built into our method. So the fact that we interview young people and we talk to people about their experiences, and we engaged through data collection with people, routinely, participants are always telling us, thank you. I loved this opportunity to talk. Thank you for asking these questions. Thank you for listening to my stories. So the idea of just engaging with folks and knowing that the process of data collection is meaningful. And then also that we are telling stories that are often not told, like we're listening to voices that are often marginalized or left out of the conversation. So that definitely gives us urgency in terms of doing the writing and getting the voice out there. So as you said, Peter, we've got some pieces under review, and we're trying to have, more of a public voice and write blogs. And that's partly because there's that sense of obligation in a positive way to our participants, right? And when we're collecting those data to really tell those stories and insights. So it is attention, and I'm not going to tell you that it just goes away. I think for those who really do care about pressing social issues, that remains. And from my experience in working with partners who are in the community and are doing on the ground work, if you will, they feel the tension too, right? So being on the ground doesn't automatically make it feel like you're making that change either. So we're all sort of part of that slow but necessary process.
That's great. Okay, so one last question, and the last question is for me. So what advice would you give to little old 19-year-old Onnie? Like, what do you wish you had known when you were getting involved in college that you know now, but little you didn't know?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think the first thing that comes to mind is to just trust yourself. So those sort of deep curiosities and questions, when I decided that I wasn't going to be an elementary school teacher, I just briefly said that, but it was really like so traumatic, and I felt so lost, and I'm making this terrible decision. But I can see how those yearnings, those questions, those curiosities that were in me really led me down the path that I really wanted to be in. So trust yourself, follow those things, and do what feels right. You can only do the next right thing. You can't know it all, but trust yourself to make that next decision.
That's wonderful. That's great. I wholeheartedly agree, and wish 19-year-old Peter knew that. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much for taking the time. I mean, it's such a busy time of year, in the craziest year any of us have ever experienced. We really appreciate, it shows a lot of you as a mentor and as a human being that you would make this time. And we're deeply, deeply grateful for all you offer to us as an office, but more importantly to students and to the world. So thank you all. Now
Peter.
Off into the expo. Actually, I'm going to drop really quickly. The next event is starting right now, which is a Q&A with some of the people who are presenting, some of the students who are presenting. So come talk to people who have been doing this. But on behalf of the office, thank you, Onnie. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I also just want to take a quick minute to thank Jenna, who has been our outreach coordinator for the last 2 years. She is leaving us this year to go off to graduate school and pursue a PhD, and we are so incredibly proud of her. I'm thankful for all her time and dedication to the office over the last 2 years, and know that she will go on to do wonderful and amazing things. And we hope you keep in touch. So thank you for everything over the last few years.
Megan.
Good luck, Jenna.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Have a great day,
Thanks.
everyone. All right. Bye, everybody.